Could you please take your seats?
Welcome to the Mediterranean Conference Centre's theatre. To ensure that your short stay with us is a safe one, the management has introduced measures which would ensure a rapid evacuation of the theatre should this be required. In this respect, you are kindly being asked to note the color-coded discs attached to the top of the seat back in front of you. This colored disc matches a colored plate posted above a particular emergency exit, located within the theatre itself. This is the door you should use to exit, or as otherwise directed by the ushers in the event of an emergency. May we remind you all to remain calm and collected during the evacuation procedure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Med Forum 2016. Moving beyond the extremist narrative, youth, peace and security. This is the title of our first open plenary session, and also the theme that should guide and inspire us during these 2 days. Across the world and across our societies, extremists are trying to dominate the agenda. The media, the way we act and think, our personal future and lives. They want to create a world of hate, discrimination, and violence. They think they can dominate, that there is no other alternative, but they are wrong. There is an alternative. There is a fresh and inspiring narrative. There are people working together through dialogue and communication and contacts. This session is about constructing this new narrative. For the 90 minutes that follow us, we will look at, explore how this narrative can be created. What are the nuts and bolts of it? What is the role of youth? That is going to be our driving message today. I'm Shada Islam. I'm from Friends of Europe in Brussels. We are a leading think tank, and we're delighted to be working with the Anna Lindh Foundation. So once again, all of you, welcome. Welcome also to those who are viewing us online, and those who are engaging with us on Twitter. Please keep your comments and your questions coming. So let's start this conversation. May I ask our panelists to join me here on stage? First of all, Ms. Irina Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO. Please come here. We also have the pleasure of having with us Mr. Lamberto Zagne, Secretary General of the OSCE and former UN Special Representative to Kosovo. Ms. Hajar Sharif, member of the Advisory Group for the Progress Study of UN Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security, the topics we are discussing today. Hajar, please come to the stage. Mr. Brian Fishman, Facebook's lead policy manager for counter-terrorism. Brian, please. And last but not least, Mehdi Joma, former head of government of Tunisia and currently a member of the World Leadership Alliance, Club de Madrid. Please, sir. So before we start our conversation today with the panelists on, as I said, the nuts and bolts of building this new, inspiring, heroic narrative, we have had the pleasure, the honor of receiving a statement by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on UN Day. Today is UN Day. And reading out the statement will be Ms. Bokova. Ms. Bokova, please do come here.
So thank you, Shadia. On behalf of the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, I send warm greetings to the Med Forum of the Anna Lindh Foundation in Valletta, and thank you for recognizing the importance of empowering the world's young people. Too often, young people are seen as a problem or as a threat. This is a profound injustice. Young people can be our greatest peace builders, bridge builders, and agents of mutual understanding. If the world is to achieve our shared goals in this generation, the next generation needs to be at the table and in the room where decisions are taken. Your gathering coincides with the observance of United Nations Day, marking the foundation of the World Organization. This is a time of transition for the world and for the United Nations. Humanity has entered the era of sustainability with a global commitment to fulfill the great promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In this, the organization's 71st year, we have 17 goals to propel us towards a better future for all on a healthy planet. I thank people across the world for their support and urge all to give their full backing to Secretary General Designate Antonio Guterres in continuing our global mission of peace, sustainable development, and human rights. Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bukova. And in fact, I'm going to kick off with the first question to you. The international community, and we've just heard from Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as well, puts a lot of emphasis on civil society, on young people. How exactly are you going to mobilize this movement in favor of peace and security and anti-extremism?
First of all, allow me to congratulate the Anna Lindh Foundation for this so important forum, and of course, the Maltese government. As we know, now that we are embarking, I would say, on a new journey, the journey of the sustainable development, a new search for peace and for security and for development, we all recognize that youth is one of the most important groups that has to be involved, and helping establish among youth civil society groups, civic engagement, I believe is critical. On many occasions, we are listening that youth are agents of change and youth are the future. And I would say that youth are the present, particularly when it comes to peace and when it comes to fighting youth radicalization and extremism. And this is the sense of the Security Council Resolution 2250. And I do recall vividly last year, almost a year ago, when in Amman there was a very important conference on youth peace and human rights, and I do remember the words of the Crown Prince of Jordan, who was initiating this important discussion, who was saying that we are witnessing a global fight for the minds and hearts of people, particularly of young people. And this is where I believe we have to double our efforts in order to give the opportunities of young people to be part of the solutions around peace. We at UNESCO, of course, it will not come as a surprise that we believe it starts on the benches of schools. We believe that in schools we have to teach peace. We have to teach human rights. We have to give intercultural competencies to young people. We have to teach history. We have to teach heritage. We have to empower young people with the knowledge about the others, of respect also for the others. We have been doing work in order to empower teachers. I would just want to show one very, I think, important first publication, a teacher's guide on the prevention of violent extremism that we have launched recently, and now that we are working with many of our partners in order to translate it, in order to adapt it to the different circumstances. In this particular sense, because the Secretary General also mentioned the new Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, when we were formulating the goal number 4 about education, about inclusive quality education and lifelong learning for all, we have launched a new concept. This is the concept of global citizenship education. And we do believe that global citizenship education will give exactly this type of competencies of young people, empowering young people, overall preparing young people for a world where we have to live together. And this is where I believe the work of Anna Lindh Foundation with so many civil society organizations and groups from the Mediterranean is playing such a critical role.
Thank you very much. So emphasis on starting young, catch them when they're young, start teaching them about the new narrative, an inspiring narrative rather than the old way of doing things, and also a teacher's guide. I think this is very important, and global citizenship. Thank you very much, Ms. Bukova. I'm sure we'll all come back to these very, very crucial, pivotal issues when we discuss this heroic narrative that we were talking about. Let me turn now to you, Lamberto Zanier. So we're seeing increase in fighting in Syria and Iraq, and it's often said, at least in Brussels we hear it, that when there is this kind of increased violence in the region, there is also the threat of increased attacks, violent attacks in Europe, in the West. So it's very important to look at the root causes, and I believe that the OSCE is actually doing that. Can you give us some insight into your work in this issue?
Sure, but let me also start by thanking the government of Malta for hosting us here and the Anna Lindh Foundation for inviting us. President Guigou was in Vienna in May last year at one of our security days on building bridges, discussing exactly these issues in a setting where the public were representatives of governments, and I'm happy to continue this discussion now with the civil society present, because I think that's an important interface for us as we work on these issues. The OSCE, for the OSCE, security is not only hard security. We have a very broad concept of security, which stretches across human rights and building resilient societies, promoting tolerance and non-discrimination, promoting the rule of law, but also dealing, of course, with conflict, mainly trying to prevent conflicts and dealing with the consequences of conflicts, and dealing with also with economic environmental issues, recognizing that economic cooperation, economic development are also key to stable societies and to stability more broadly. So that's where we are coming from, and those are the considerations that we put forward when we start analyzing the root causes, as you put it. Of course, conflict, and what we are seeing, and we see it very much in the OSCE, but you see it also in this region, that there is a return of geopolitics, and the return of geopolitics is making conflicts, unfortunately, more likely and also more intractable. And this is obviously then adding to the difficulties that we already have. But the concept remains that societies and countries are at peace not only when states feel that they are protected, they are safe, but also when societies are stable and societies are secure. So we need, while we keep interacting with countries, and that's why at the beginning I said the intergovernmental side, but we need also to deal with the problems of the societies, and we need to make sure that we address them, we don't ignore them. So looking on the aspirations of the people and the aspirations of the young people, I think, are fundamental in this issue. And this includes a range of issues, the economic needs that we mentioned, the social demands, and addressing the diversities, the cultural, even the religious diversities. But the religious issues, as we deal also with interfaith dialogue, I wouldn't put that up front, but sometimes those differences are highlighted more as a result of other problems. And even this radicalization or extreme interpretations of religion are determined by different causes. Bottom line is that nobody is born a terrorist, but terrorism can arise from a number of issues that exist in there, and they need addressing. So, for instance, in dealing with this comprehensive security approach, we need to work to promote tolerance and non-discrimination. We need to ensure that there is full integration and protection of the minority groups, because we see in our societies, also in the West, And some of the foreign fighters that were in Syria came from our societies in the West. And so we need also to understand why and to work on these issues. And certainly the intercultural and interreligious dialogue are one element that will help us doing that. A strong accent on education, and on this we have linked ourselves also with UNESCO, and we need to work with the schools, we need to work with the teachers, but we need to work with young people. Young people, I see them not at all as perpetrators or in a way the actors of violent extremism. I see them primarily as victims of radicalization. So we need to protect them. We need to understand what their aspirations are. And Anna Lind helps us there too, because they issued a survey where they show that in fact the aspirations of the young people across the region are the same. And so it is important that we bring them together. We work with them and we try to address these aspirations. And that's where organizations like ours can transfer in a way this to governments. And we need really to push governments to engage with youth. We have to facilitate the establishment of that connection.
Thank you, Lamberto. So you have to work on many, many strands, many facets at the same time. Nobody's born a terrorist, and we will see later on, we have slides from some preliminary results of a poll we did on both sides of the Mediterranean. Aspirations really do seem to be quite similar on both banks of the Mediterranean. So thank you very much for that. My question would be, and I'll bring it up with you later, whether you really see any government, any country actually deploying all those different tools, if you like, to tackle extremism. But we'll come to that later on. Hajar Sharif, I want to ask you, you are a member of the progress study on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2250. What are the different measures that you are deploying to engage youth as ambassadors for anti-radicalization?
I think it's important to talk about the issue of peace and security, and then look at 2250. 2250 is a Security Council resolution mainly recognizing the role of youth and their importance, influence in peace and security. So it's very important to talk about it and address it as we are talking about peace and security that matters to everyone, the global peace and security, the local peace and security, and the national peace and security. And what is the role of youth in that? So it's not we are talking about youth issues only, no, we are talking about this priority that matters to everyone, this common priority, and how youth can contribute to that, or actually contributing. When it comes to the measuring, I think it's really important also to know that the Security Council recognized the role of youth in peace and security, but the recognition in its all, it's not enough. So now, after we got the Security Council resolution in December, it's time for implementation. And despite the fact that the resolution was adopted from the Security Council, and our role as the advisory group for the global study is meant to be a study to showcase the role of youth in peace and security, but also to introduce a strategy on how this can actually be implemented. What do we actually mean by youth, peace and security from a youth perspective? And that doesn't only goes within the Security Council, but also with different sectors. And I'm very glad to have the director of UNESCO here, because I think we all do recognize the role of education in peace and security. And within our discussions in the advisory group, which was just last week actually, we were talking a lot about the role of education in society and promoting for peace. But it's also not only about talking about peace as we all know it, it's also about talking about security. So peace building and security measures, how can we integrate youth in that? Because often, if we talk about, well, we need to include youth in peace building, often people think, and this is also falls with the international efforts in conflict resolution and in peace building in conflict areas, they often tend to think that, well, youth need to be a separate group. Perhaps they can do a workshop, a training, or a separate project. But what we really mean by 2250 and our contribution as youth in peace building and security is that, no, if we talk about particular measures, is we can look at, are youth actually sitting on the table of peace negotiations? Are youth being consulted when it comes, for example, for the security sector reform? But also another important thing to keep in mind is that peace and security are not only the concern of conflict countries, it's a global concern. Maybe I'm coming from Libya, maybe in Libya 2250 means the participation of youth in the peace building process, peace negotiation. But in somewhere else, in the most peaceful, stable context, you can think of any example of any country that is stable. The participation of youth in peace and security, it can also be integrated in the efforts of, for example, adopting national plans on de-radicalization of societies, etc. So it's really important to keep in mind that we are not talking about what youth are doing in peace building only, but we are also talking about their role in security. And often countering violent extremism and prevention of violent extremism, those are often topics linked to security measures.
Right, but how, just a quick implementation. So are you also going to monitor how this resolution is implemented?
Yeah, at the moment what we are doing different consultations. So we are the advisory group for the study in itself, but it's not up to us only to say this is how it is. So for an example, we are taking the opportunity of this forum and the young people who are present in this forum, and we are asking young people how do they think this should be implemented. And the best thing about having a Security Council resolution is that we have an entry point to the Security Council resolution to present the voice of youth and their perspectives, again, not only in peace building, but also in security matters.
Right, so involving young people, youth in peace and security discussions on the national level, but also on the international level. Yeah. Right, okay. Let's turn now to Brian Fishman. Brian Fishman, countering extremism discourse online is a big issue now because increasingly people say, I heard this in Brussels and other European capitals, potential terrorists are inspired or radicalized online, behind their laptops is the word that was used. What is a company like Facebook doing to actually stop that from happening?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having us here today. I think we really feel this is an opportunity to be on stage and explain Facebook's position on these things. Let me start with just a question to everybody in the room, which is, how many folks, just think to yourself, have a Facebook profile, an Instagram profile, a WhatsApp account, or use Messenger? Around the world, 1.7 billion people use Facebook every month, and more than 1 billion every day. So this community is incredibly robust, it's incredibly diverse. Facebook, fundamentally, the mission of our company is to connect the world, which sounds sort of grandiose in a typical Silicon Valley sense, but we really believe that. We really believe that by providing a safe forum for people from all over the world to communicate with friends and family, with neighbors, with people on the other end of the world, we bring the world closer together, we make it a better place. There are challenges, obviously, to this, and the extremists that you mentioned earlier are one of them. One of the insights that I think is fundamental to the way that we think about a digital platform that can bring the world closer together is that in order for people to share, they have to feel safe. And that informs our strategy for enforcing our terms of service, which is sort of a baseline. Our terms of service have a blanket prevention for extremist hate groups, terrorist organizations. An ISIS fighter is not allowed to post pictures of kittens on Facebook. That is not okay. Support, praise, and representation of terrorist organizations is not acceptable. But the more exciting part of what we think about in terms of pushing back on extremist voices on Facebook is supporting the voices out there, the overwhelming majority of voices that are pushing back every day on these extremists. Some people are pushing back directly and very pointedly. Some people are pushing back by focusing on their everyday issues and just living their lives more robustly. So we do a number of things in this way. We try to stay a step back. We don't think it's our place to have our own active voice on the platform condemning terrorism. So we work to support NGOs to do this. We provide trainings on social media. We commission research on the kinds of messages that tend to resonate when folks are countering violent extremism online. The typical findings, just at a high level, are the sorts of things that advertising executives know. Video tends to get more views. Positive messages, satire, humor tends to be very effective. Not this sort of overly serious critique doesn't seem to get as viral for obvious reasons, I think. That's not how most of us want to live. So we do that through a variety of forums, through the Online Civil Courage Initiative in Europe in particular. We work with a program with the State Department, P2P, that works with universities globally to run these sort of trainings through universities. But I think the key element here in the way that we think about this, and I don't want to speak for Silicon Valley writ large, but I think this sense is very real, is that we need to be part of a system where, with activists and NGOs using our platforms, we want to help those people use our platforms better. We want to help them use Facebook and the rest of our platforms more effectively. But we don't necessarily know who to go to. We need help doing those things, and that's where we need some guidance. We need help from governments. We need help from international NGOs. We need to be brought together and convened. And I think that that's really key here, where we want to provide a forum. We want to provide a platform. We want to support the positive voices, but we want to be brought to the table. And I can pledge on behalf of Facebook, we will show up. Invite us and we'll be there.
Right, so I'm going to ask actually you, Ms. Bukova, and also Metho. You heard the message. We need to be brought to the table. We need to engage. We need to work with governments and international organizations. Very quickly, what's your response? Are you doing it?
I immediately wanted to react because I think this is important. 2 years ago, we organized a conference, a discussion on internet and youth radicalization. And it was one of the first debates that we had on how to, in a positive manner, look at the internet, this incredible opportunity of social networks and others to give positive message and to counter this radicalization, because we know that extremists, unfortunately, are still quite good at using these new ways of outreach to the young people. And what is very interesting and what we are seeing now 2 years later, in fact, we move next week on the 29th and 30th, we have a second such conference in Canada on the same topic. And it is interesting that, of course, we cannot just simply stop using these incredible opportunities for young people to communicate. But it is very important to give a different message, different narrative, to change the language, to give a different perspective also to young people. So this is where we launched a couple of important campaigns. One of our most successful campaigns is Unite for Heritage, using the social networks. In fact, I launched this campaign in Baghdad, at the University of Baghdad, when I went 2 years ago to meet with the young people. And I saw their thirst for positive, for connecting to other people, for protecting their diversity, their culture, their heritage. And now it becomes one of the most successful, where millions of young people every single day are uploading, are sharing some ideas about diversity, about culture, about heritage. And I think this is the way we should look at the internet and young people.
Thank you very much. I'll come to you in a minute, Lamberto, but I do need to turn to Madi Joma as well, because one of the issues that we all worry about also is this disconnect between people and politicians. And political leadership has a great responsibility. We've heard from all our panelists about how important it is. So what is, do you think, the political side of this discourse? What are political leaders doing in your region, in North Africa and the Middle East, to promote a culture of tolerance, to fight extremism?
Bonjour à tous. Tout d'abord, je vais vous solliciter.
First of all, I would like to ask for some concentration, since I'm going to express myself in French. I chose to answer in French, but I would not go as far as Arabic. Although we have interpretation, I will also answer in Arabic. First of all, yes, we have a real problem in our discourse. I think in the framework of the Madrid Club, we launched an initiative to create another discourse of politician and also non-politician in the media, which is supposed to oppose the other discourse. I started from personal experience. I remember when I was a prime minister, I was impressed by the message going around. That is, we saw the message of the extremists was talking about victory because they succeeded in killing, and killing is not really a victory. And at the same time, they were showing mothers crying because of their children, and they were blaming the state. And here I saw a real problem of communication. People who were killing were getting the message through, but the hero who were there to stop these people from committing crimes, and we did not talk about that. And we worked with the media to try, without of course interfering with their job, just to tell them to come out of the stereotype formal discourse to find another way of expression. And I think it was simple. And it was mainly young people who talk the language of young people, while we were also we're all talking in a formal way. And as long as we didn't put the young people in the center of communication to produce another message, we had to find young people who understand those codes and who will occupy these spaces. They are, of course, on the social networks. They're with messages 1.5 minutes, messages that they go straight to their to the objectives, and that's the importance of the place of young people, not because only they are young, but in a communication operation you have to know the codes, and the young people know that. I think this is very important. We work, of course, within the Madrid Club on this, and I also chair an initiative on dialogue between democracy and freedom, and if we do not involve the young people there, because we cannot prepare the future with our generation. I underline the issue of the young people, because we cannot solve our problems. We need the long-term perspective, and we cannot do that by ourselves. We have young people and, of course, less young people. They each contribute their way, and by working together we can build something constructive. And of course, everybody should feel involved in everything we would like to do for the future.
We see the victories of the extremists, but we don't see their defeat. It isn't on our screens, it isn't on our social media so much. Brings me to you, Lamberto, and the question of media. Media plays an enormous role in inspiring, inciting, creating narratives. I'm just wondering how, I see now, I mean, I used to be a journalist, I see now that media is becoming a little bit more aware of the dangers that they're engaging in if they give too much publicity to the extremist narrative. What is the OSCE? What is your opinion on that? How can you engage media to become part of a positive, constructive, inspiring discourse rather than a destructive one?
I think this issue goes very much to the core of the question that we are discussing, because it's about narratives. And actually, we found ourselves ill-equipped to address that. First of all, we were always drawn to a kind of a law enforcement response to violent extremism. And in the relations with media, we reflected that. Condemnation and press statements, and we were facing instead proselytism via social media and that kind of thing. So we need to change level. So the bottom line is that it's our responsibility to address these issues in the broader context that we were discussing earlier, addressing and recognizing the root causes and addressing them in the first place. Secondly, we need also to counter the negative narratives through a positive discourse, and that's where part of this we can try to do ourselves, but we really need to engage with the society. We need to engage with young people, for instance, and have them also do that job to protect themselves. So we need to help them help themselves in a way, and engage also with the media tools that are more familiar to them. But on our side, the responsibility remains that we need to change the way we deal with the larger media and change our policies to address the root causes more consistently.
So increasingly, of course, young people, and I see many in this audience, are taking things in their own hands with their own blogs, Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, etc. Let me open the floor now to questions and comments from yourselves. You've heard our eminent panelists, you've heard their views on what needs to be done, as I said, the nuts and bolts of this new narrative that is important to construct. So I'd like to take a few questions. I think there are also questions or comments coming in from Twitter that we can take at the moment. So first of all, I'd like to turn to some young people, and I have two here. So Helle, would you like to please go first? Use this opportunity to engage. No, you need a microphone. Just wait a second. Just very quickly identify yourself.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hela Grishi, and I'm from Tunisia, and I belong to the Young Arab Voices. And currently, I'm a teacher at Qasrin in Tunisia. So I have just a quick remark that has been bugging me for a while, which is when I went to this interior region, I was used to Tunis, the capital, all the cultural activities there. There's a lot of movement. But when I went there, I was really at awe about how young people there survive, literally. Because I feel like civil society is really having difficulties reaching out to these regions. And the problem is, once there is a vacuum for people, and especially youth in these regions, and they don't have any cultural activities or anything that could hinder them from becoming radical, and if they don't have economic opportunities, we let them seethe in this vacuum. And how can we counter this, and how can we reach out more to these people? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hela. That's a very important point, the urban-rural divide, as you talked about. And also, of course, I guess that brings us also to the question of access to the internet. There isn't obvious access, widespread access. The young man sitting next to Hela.
Hello, Ahmed Farah, past president of GCI Gabus Jr. and participant from Tunisia and Young Arab Voices. I really liked what all of the panelists said, especially Mr. Mahijama, about engaging youth and making them really part of this transition and countering terrorism, countering extremist narratives. But I was wondering what steps are we planning on taking in Tunisia and the Mediterranean region in general to actually implement and try to make youth a much more bigger and serious part of this transition, of this conversation.
Mm-hmm. So from words to action. Thank you very much for those two. I did see one more hand go up, and I'm happy. Yes, there's a gentleman right at the back. Please identify yourself.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Igor Jurisic is my name, and I'm coming from Slovenia, from Hosteling International Slovenia. So my question goes to direction, because we are talking about the extremism, and we are talking about the consequences. But my question will go a little bit deeper. So why don't we search for the roots, why this extremism is rising in some countries, especially in the North Africa? And one of the answers is that still 14 countries are forced and obliged to pay French colonial tax. So in my opinion, I don't support any extremism at all, but if you are paying to some country which is 10, 20 or 50 times richer than you, the tax every year because you were colonized the decades ago. Of course, when you see your style of life and your and how poor some people are in your country, and then you see the country you are paying the tax, like France, which is rich and developed country, of course you become angry. And this is the environment where you can grow extremism much better than in some other places. So my question is, what UN is planning to do to stop those poor countries paying French colonial tax? And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I was wondering if there has been any comment on Twitter that we would like to bring in at this point. Okay, if not, let's show some slides. We've just done the normal sort of preliminary annual report on intercultural trends. We did that survey a few weeks ago, and the preliminary results of the survey have come in, and I think they make for some quite instructive and important reading. So I was wondering, there they are. So let's have the first slide. I was wondering if our panelists can see it as well. Yes? Okay, so the question that was asked was, what are the benefits of Euro-Mediterranean cooperation? That was the question that was put to about 10,000 people on both shores of the Mediterranean. And as you see, a majority in both European countries and the southern and eastern Mediterranean countries saw opportunities for education and training as a very important benefit. And then if you scroll down, you see also the question of equality between men and women, entrepreneurship, innovation, and youth, and very importantly also recognition of cultural diversity and the importance of anti-radicalization. That is the first slide that I would like our panelists to have a look at. Can we have the second slide, please? So this question was about tackling radicalization through dialogue. And once again, I think the findings are quite interesting. And they show the importance of supporting youth programs and youth participation because they're seen and perceived as very important and efficient measures to prevent conflict and radicalization. So education and youth programs, support of youth participation in public life, cultural and artistic initiatives, and inter-religious dialogue as well, exchange programs as well. And there you see quite a significant difference once in a while between the European countries and the southern and eastern Mediterranean countries. Right. You've had time to look at it and absorb it? Ms. Bukova, I was just wondering if you'd like to respond to some of the questions that have been put by our young people here in the audience, and also to the results of these preliminary findings that we see.
I find it indeed very interesting that on both sides of the Mediterranean, young people are looking for opportunities for education. And I would emphasize the word opportunities, because when you see a society without opportunities, where young people do not have the access or the competencies to education, to skills, to engage in their future life, for innovation, for creativity, of course, we have a society that is not peaceful. And what Lamberto just said, we're looking at resilient societies, societies that have the forces inside in order to stand up against radicalization and extremism. And I think this is very, very interesting and very important. We have to look also at the differences sometimes, and we have to absorb very well and to analyze what are the differences in the approaches into the interreligious dialogue, and to put more emphasis maybe on this side of a dialogue. I think dialogue is not just talking. Dialogue needs also competencies, and we have to teach young people this type of competencies in order to have this dialogue. And then what I think it's very important, it's the rather, I would say, a coincidence, a congruence of approach in terms of diversity and how we have to maintain this diversity and how we have to look at that. Societies are diverse, societies are increasingly, I would say, diverse, and this is a reality around us. So I believe tolerance is not enough. We speak about tolerance. It's not about to tolerate the others. It's about living together. And living together requires something more, I would say, than just tolerance. And this is where we have to teach young people.
Thank you very much. Lamberto.
Yeah, first of all, on the first question, the civil society in all regions, that's a problem that we have sometimes also in the OSCE. This is primarily the responsibility of governments to make sure that they really create the conditions for development of civil society everywhere. What we can do as international organizations is support them, raise awareness and push them in that direction. Of course, in the case of Tunisia, as far as the OSCE is concerned, Tunisia is a partner, so it's not a full member, so we have a limit to how much we can encourage them to do it, but we can show what we have done in other parts of the OSCE and replicate certain models. It's important that they are aware of the problem and of the issue. So that's where also the connection with the civil society, with you, is important for me to become aware, for me to be able to talk to the governments in this sense. There is a larger issue, which I mentioned earlier in addressing these things, which is geopolitics, and geopolitics is complicating everything. To give you an example, and just to make a name, Libya. Libya is a country that needs stabilizing, and it needs stronger cooperation from the regional community, from the international community. And it's a very tough and it's a very difficult task, but it needs to be done. And Libya has applied for partnership in the OSCE. All other North African countries are partners of the OSCE, from Morocco down to Jordan. And, but Libya is being blocked for political reasons by one member state of the OSCE. So we don't even have the opportunity or the ability to bring them in to try to start working with them on issues like this, on working with civil society, trying to develop a little bit of a stronger society network in Libya. And this is really the last point. And looking at these are things on which we are working. Actually, I'm discussing now with Mr. Vella the possibility of setting up, maybe even here in Malta, a center of excellence of some kind to start working on education and youth programs, for instance, bringing in people from the two sides of the Mediterranean, creating connections, and that would also, it's something we would like to do also at the level of NGOs, involving governments, of course, but having governments send us people and young people also to work on this set of issues, to create the conditions for youth participation in public life, for instance, which is essential in my view. So we all need, and we have many tools in the international community. The OSCE is just one of them, and not even the most effective when it comes to the Mediterranean issues, but we do cover that dimension, and we want to invest all the tools that we have to maximize the impact based on this broad approach to security that was addressing earlier.
So it validates many of the things that we've been talking about, actually. It gives us additional arguments.
We need to translate into practice and into action.
Right. Yeah. Monsieur Joma.
Bon, enfin, en parlant de radicalisation...
Speaking about radicalization, I always make a reference to the generation of our parents. They had a difficult life, but they did not resort to radicalization. Why? Because there was this education effort, which, you know, and when you talk about education, it's not learning and teaching. No, these are the values which we all share, and this side is very important. Each one of us has done his part of the duty, and this shows very well that we need. If there is a sector that we should invest in, is education, and I do believe that I come from a country where we don't have a lot of wealth, but we have invested a lot in education. We taken the young by the hand, and we have been working on this for 20, 30, 40 years. And so we need to invest in education in the sense of learning and also the values. And I do believe that if there is a common effort to do, that would be education.
Vous dites investir dans l'éducation.
Non, je vais pas.
I wouldn't spend all my life in politics, and no, and so we need to do this. We need to talk about education. We need to invest in different fields, but I do believe the investment in education is the most important. Education will pay cash, and will not pay cash, but this is on the long run. And we should not look for the immediate benefit. No, we should look for the benefit on the long term and on the long run. Education is an investment on the long run, which would be weighed by different generations. So today you invest in the children of the primary school, or those who are just starting school, and you will see the product maybe in 20 or 30 years. So this is a new political logic which would have this future vision, the vision to invest in the younger generations. What Mrs. Bikova said.
Important. Hajar, I wanted to ask you, because there were also questions about the urban-rural divide, also questions about engaging youth in discussions, things you said, peace and security, and your assessment of what we just see here.
I think it's really important to look at the issues not from where they are standing right now, because at the end we will get perhaps to the wrong diagnosis of the issue, and then this will mean that we will have the wrong response. And if we look at violent extremism at this moment, the most dominant groups are the ones who are under the spotlight and the ones who are grabbing our attentions. Those are the ones who are they seem that they are talking with the name of religion, or they're representing a certain group. And that's what I find it myself. Perhaps it's bothering me, as I'm going to use the word Hala said, it's bothering me to see that global policies or the narratives on countering violent extremism that also includes the focus on peace building and security measures, it often looks at the people themselves. It looks at those groups, and it ends up criminalizing those groups. And what will happen if you criminalize a certain group of people just because of the way they look or their beliefs or where they are coming from? You will reach to what the gentleman at the end said. People will get angry. And then more or less, instead of trying to recruit more people to the cause and to help more in countering violent extremism and to help in peace building, those groups will strike, because at the end they will feel that they will need to protect their part of identity. But the most important thing about what education and culture events and all of this focus on the society in itself, it creates this peaceful space where people can talk about what they are angry about. And if we're talking about youth, then creating those spaces, and spaces that are not only created for the sake of saying, well, we are addressing youth issues, so let's organize a separate meeting. No, creating a qualified place where the voice of youth and their needs will be really addressed within the issues. So I might be colorblind, but I don't really, I don't know if that follows under the majority within the interreligious dialogue. Is that under which category is it?
Interreligious dialogue?
Yeah.
Interreligious dialogue is 58, so this is remarkably different in the southern and eastern Mediterranean countries. Yeah. 58% think it's very efficient.
Yeah. And
whereas in Europe it's 30%. But if you put it all together, yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I don't find these, it's very good to highlight these numbers, but I don't find them like groundbreaking, because isn't that the normal? Isn't that the normal of the majority of the people in peaceful context, but also in conflict context? If we look at Libya, Libya is a country that literally within less than a month went from a peaceful society to a violent society. We had a flood of weapons, we had basically a vacuum of law and order, and then how many Libyan youth are actually joined armed groups? How many Libyan youth are holding weapons in the street? Whether if we look at the majority of them, they are still studying, despite the fact that some universities are closed, some universities were shut down, and yet people are still trying to find a way where they can express themselves in the most peaceful means possible. So I think it's really risky to look at the issues from where we are standing right now, because that leads us to adopt the wrong narrative that will make things go worse, not even influencing them in a positive way.
But when you are at the United Nations and you're taking part in these discussions, this awareness of these kinds of opinions, these kinds of priorities are conveyed, are accepted there among the high-level United Nations officials?
I would say yes. I think what's the challenge part is how to actually find this intersection between if we're talking about peace and security, between the soft security measures and the hard security measures. And that goes back to how we're looking at the issue. If we're looking at the extremist groups at the moment, of course, if you go to the Security Council or those with the focus on the hard security measures, as in terms of investing in defense, weapons, you know, this military response, if you go to them now at this moment and say, well, education will solve this issue, or say investing in youth would solve this issue, of course it's really challenging for them to understand it, because it's like we are all based and used to that, like there is an action and we should have a reaction. But at the end, I don't know how many wars this world still needs to prove that violence generates more violence. And we are not looking at those issues from a very short-term perspective. We should look at them in the long-term perspective. So even solving the current issues at the moment, even talking about extremist groups at the moment, we should also adopt the perspective that we need to work on societies from the long-term perspective. And no one knows better what the long-term perspectives should adopt better than the societies themselves. And in that part, consulting youth in terms of peace and security, but also countering violent extremism is really important if we really want to solve the root causes of the issue, not only trying to tackle the issue and cover it the way it is now and focusing on countering violent extremism. We should try to understand that it's about preventing violent extremism, not only looking at it, how to stop this violence that's happening at the moment, because otherwise it will never stop.
Mr. Joma, yes, Ms. Gova, please go ahead. I just wanted to ask Mr. Joma, the elected politicians aren't very good at the long-term perspective, are they? They're not very good at thinking long-term, what Hajar was talking about.
No, je vais pas généraliser.
I will not generalize, but they usually have a priority. It depends on elections. This is something that should be dealt with. I think it's a real problem today. We are on a logic of elections. That's democracy, of course, but we should also, especially in new democracy, in mature democracies, there are institutions that are competent and that ensure continuity and anticipation. But in new democracies, we don't have that tradition. So we have an impact from that approach. We should be aware that we are in a stage of consolidation and that we should make an additional effort and come out of the model of mature democracy to make sure that we look in the long run and to have more responsibility, because we are building, in a stage of building.
Please, your insights.
Yeah, well, I think the question here about the urban-rural access, I think this is a place where there is room for collaboration between governments and the private sector generally. You know, when it comes to internet access, which of course is the focus of Facebook, we have a major program called internet.org to bring internet access to lots of places around the world. I don't know off the top of my head whether we work in Tunisia, but this is a collaboration where Facebook works with local telecommunications providers, often within a framework where government supports those efforts. And that winds up being a way to extend access to the global communication system to people that do not have it. Now, that's not what folks that are struggling to have clean water maybe need first. You know, there are basic needs that come before internet access, but we really think of internet as a human right, as the ability to communicate as a human right, the ability to share your ideas and project them globally as a human right. And so that notion, I think, is really critical, and it's really something that I think there is a generational divide on this. This is something that I think young people have grown up with and they accept, whereas myself, I'm 37, I remember the sort of pre-internet era. I'm sort of the last generation to do so. But if you're in your early 20s, you don't. Many of my colleagues at Facebook don't. They grew up in an era where the internet was a given. And I think many folks around the world are the same way. Yesterday we had there was a session with the Youth Civil Action Network, and some of the young folks in the room participated in it. And I wish, there's a lot of optimism on the panel, and you feel the optimism in the room, but you'd be even more optimistic if you saw what I saw yesterday, which was small groups of young people from across the Arab world and Europe sitting around working out problems working out solutions, actual campaigns, generating who do they want to target, who's the audience they want to communicate with. How do they want to communicate that message? What is the problem they want to solve? Issues ranging from economic access and economic opportunity to notions of masculinity in Egypt, these kinds of things, and then actually developing prototypes in a day, right? So, maybe these aren't totally ready for prime time, but one of the things that I really loved about what I saw yesterday is and what I think that that young people understand intuitively is a core ethos of Silicon Valley, which is it's okay to fail. And if you're going to fail, fail quickly. And that idea, I think, should inform a lot of our, and the reason why it's okay to fail is because you learn something. That's harder for governments to do. It's harder for governments to embrace the notion of failure. It's harder for folks deeper into their career to embrace the notion of failure. Young people can do that. And that's why that's where the energy comes from. That's why there's so much creativity there. That is the ethos that we certainly embrace at Facebook, that Silicon Valley writ large embraces. And I think that's why, and when we think about counter speech, when we think about positive speech, we've got to understand it's not always going to be perfect. And some of it's just not going to work. And that's okay. Because what we need is more of it. We need more people with their heart in the right place, feeling empowered to speak, not necessarily the perfect message. And there's going to be some failure there, and that's all right. And I think that, I hope that the young people in the audience feel that there is value in taking the risk to try. And there is value in that, even if it doesn't work perfectly.
Yesterday was, I have to admit, I was there for a bit as well. It was very, very impressive. Lamberto, you wanted a few words, and then I'll give you the floor, Ms. Bukova, please.
Yeah, thank you. I thought this was the issue that was raised now on the politicians and the short term is key. In addressing a number of things that we have on our agenda, many of them addressing the root causes. Whether this is climate change or sustainable development agenda, the approach tends always to be a short-term one, which doesn't help. And we really need more engagement. How do we get it? One of the answers is more multilateralism, building coalitions and pushing countries also through agreed policies and focusing on implementation. But on multilateralism also we have the problem in my organization, for instance, it's an intergovernmental organization. So I have again the government sitting around the table and I need to push them. One of the things I've done, I introduced a new model of discussion, which we call the Security Days, where we involve youth, we involve academia, we involve media, civil society, right. And we broaden the discussion, and the governments are there, and we force them to engage in this broad setting. So I think these new models should be further developed. I'm organizing one with mayors now, because mayors are dealing with issues that their respective governments sometimes don't accept to deal in the same way. And I want to put the governments on the spot by showing them what their mayors are doing and they're achieving. One thing for the civil society, as I try to create an interface for you to engage with us, I would like to invite you also to reach out to us more. We have campaigns, for instance, on countering violent extremism, and you can also join those campaigns. Feel free to do it. Feel free also to reach out to us and help us and help me sort of understand better how can I help you, how can I reach out and satisfy in fact your requirements and support you. So I think we need to build coalitions that are very different in nature. As I say, even the private sector I want to bring in, because if we put the economy as one of the issues, we need to help create also the conditions for that, and through governments it's not enough. So a new way of working, and let's build Analint can be a very useful tool for this. There are others as well. Let's use them.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bukova.
Yes, I wanted to react to a very previous intervention. Two things. First, I think that the politicians, international organizations, and of course I'm talking about United Nations, UNESCO, are increasingly involved in these issues. It was totally unimaginable a couple of years ago that the Security Council will adopt a resolution on youth and peace and security. It was not considered to be part of the efforts of the Security Council and the United Nations, or to adopt a resolution on financing of extremism and including the destruction of heritage and the illicit trafficking of art. All these are, I would say, a new look at the soft power of the United Nations, including particularly about youth engagement, about the civil society, and I think this is extremely positive. This is how we contribute to the plan of action to prevent violent extremism through education or to counter terrorism. All these are very new elements. It means that the approach of the United Nations is much more elaborate, much more closer to what is needed. And another issue which we didn't think about, but I think it's critical in this debate, it is about refugees, youth, refugees and education. And this is where, unfortunately, still not sufficient resources, attention is being paid to the young people, to the generation, to the boys and girls that are out of school. We know that it is a huge challenge for many of the countries, for Jordan, for Lebanon, for many of the countries, for Greece, for Turkey, the countries in the Mediterranean. And this is where we launched a platform of Education Cannot Wait, where we appeal to the international community to give more resources, to pay more attention, because we don't want to have a lost generation, and we unfortunately see it, a lost generation in the making, which then will be lured by extremism and by all these terrorist groups.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bykova, for those very wise, it's a wise warning, in fact, that you've given us, and some good insights. So I think as we come to the end of this very exciting and stimulating panel discussion, I think we're all here agree that there is a consensus on the importance of youth and education in fighting this discourse of hatred and discrimination and violence that is around us. So there is, as I said in the beginning, an alternative narrative, one that is based on openness and tolerance and hope. We have the strategy, we've discussed it today, we have the strategy, we know what needs to be done, we have the people engaged in this struggle. So we know what's wrong, we have a strategy, and now we have to move to implementation. And that's where partnerships of the kind that we have established here, that's where the Anna Lindh Foundation and all the different partners it works with are so, so important. We'll hear about them in a minute. We'll hear about this initiative, Young Mediterranean Voices, which is a campaign and advocacy initiative. We'll hear about it in just a minute. But first, please join me in thanking our panelists for their contributions. Thank you very much. We will continue the conversation later on, but for the moment, Ms. Bykova, thank you. Lamberto, thank you. Thank you very much. So, we move now to the next phase, the next step in our discussion today, and this is a very exciting and important moment for all of us working on this new era of dialogue. As I said, it's the launch of Young Mediterranean Voices. It's an advocacy and campaign initiative, and it works to transform all the different things that we've been saying now into action. Could we have a video, please? Could I ask the panelists to please come?
Today has been a practical workshop to expand on how this toolkit can be actually used. We have been learned how to make a campaign or how we can deliver the message that we want people to understand using social media or trying to make people think about alternative solutions for this issue.
If you are trying to build the younger generations, so you are trying to work for the future of your countries and for the Mediterranean, especially that we are facing a lot of challenges, a lot of issues right now in these days. If we try to work on a concept that relates policy to capacity building together with the people who are working on shaping the future of the next generation, it will be very good efficiency on the level of results.
I think that young people are important nowadays because they are the ones who are capable of making a change. Being a Tunisian, I think that after the revolution, it is time for us to have a say in our decision on policy making, in politics, in education, because we are really the ones involved.
I think it's the most important portion of society, as it is the transition portion, and they will be the leaders of tomorrow, so they will be the decision makers, so we need to set them up to this second phase.
The new Young Mediterranean Voices is important because it provides a new opportunity for young people across the MENA region to actually discuss and voice their own agendas.
First of all, it analyzes the challenges that this region is facing, and it moves to finding solutions and connecting people together so that they focus on finding solutions and finding opportunities for the young people in the regions and in their countries. At this point, when this process is very helpful in identifying opportunities for collaboration between countries, between organizations and even individuals, so that we reach the final result, which is intercultural dialogue in a very peaceful way.
Well, the Mediterranean area is a very rich area that has a lot of different cultures. So people are coming from the North African, the Arab culture and European culture. So I think it's a very perfect platform for people to start to speak and integrate together and start to have a common platform to express their rights and to express their needs and what they expect from others. I think it's also breaking a lot of stereotypes about each other that are not true.
It is time for youth to take their own fate into their own hands and try to change it.
So indeed, it is about breaking stereotypes. It's also setting a precedent in bringing a pan-Arab social movement to Europe, and it follows the launch, as you know, in 2011 of the widely acclaimed Young Arab Voices, which was launched by the Anna Lindh Foundation and the British Council. So the work, as you saw here on your screens, has already begun. There was very, very dynamic exchanges between the young people yesterday, and now I'd like to have the pleasure of inviting to the stage the main partners behind this expansion phase of Young Mediterranean Voices. First of all, may I ask Elizabeth Guigou, the president of the Anna Lindh Foundation, to please join us here on the stage. The British Council, Mr. David Knox. Center for Mediterranean Integration, Mr. Murad Ezzin. Please do come up to the stage here. Ms. Guigou, yeah. The World Bank Group, Olivier Lavinal. The Government of Finland, Carolina Heikinheimo Perez. The European Union, Nick Westcott from the External Action Service. And founding youth sector members. I think you'll have to stay, you can sit or you can stand, this is informal. Founding youth sector members, so we have Rehab Medjri from Tunisia, welcome Rehab. Kristina Setkovic, Montenegro. Malik Imis from Jordan, Vasily Golikov, Estonia, and the UK. So we also have the pleasure of having received a statement, a video statement by Federica Mogherini. She's the Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. So could we see her statement, please?
Dear friends, I'm really sorry I cannot be with you today. Whenever I have the opportunity to meet young people from our region, it's a breath of fresh air. There's this notion that a lot of young people don't really care about the world around them, that they are too cynical,
or self-centered. This is not the impression I have. I see a lot of young people who are just looking for ways to get involved, to get the education they aspire to or the job they deserve, to do something good with their life and for their community. They want change, and they will not wait for others to make it happen. They want to be, you want to be, the drivers of change. On our side, I believe we have a responsibility. First of all, a responsibility to listen. You know, last summer I presented a global strategy for European foreign policy. And some of the most inspiring meetings I had during the drafting of the strategy were exactly with young people, both from Europe and beyond, with Erasmus students, with young leaders from Africa or from the Middle East. But we also have a responsibility to create new pathways for young people to get involved. This is crucial in Europe, and even more crucial on the other side of the Mediterranean, where 2/3 of the population are under 30. Open all possible channels, not for tomorrow, but for today. And this was the original idea behind the Young Arab Voices program, launched by the Anna Lindh Foundation at the beginning of the Arab Awakening. Since then, we have realized that we couldn't simply focus on young people in North Africa and in the Middle East. Although our societies are different, our young people in Europe feel many of the same passions and fears and aspirations of young Arabs. We dream the same dreams. So for me, the evolution from young Arab voices to young Mediterranean voices is only natural. But the new program will not only have a broader geographical scope. While we keep training young leaders, we will focus on how they can shape the public debate. The plan is to form young journalists, twin them with senior professionals, and reach out to the media industry. Our work does not end today with the launch of the Young Mediterranean Voices. Together we can ensure that the Med Forum is not just a one-off event. You, the Anna Lindh Foundation, and the European institutions, with a special role for the forthcoming Maltese presidency of the European Council, we together can ensure that this forum shapes the policies of the European Union. On my side, I will do my best to listen and to act. And for this reason, I've announced a new initiative for Young Mediterranean Voices. I will soon invite some of you to meet me in Brussels, to start a conversation and to bring about real change. So let me wish you a very good meeting, and I really look forward to seeing you all in Brussels very soon. Thank you.
So, an ambitious program, an inspiring program, interchange, exchanges, connectivity. Nick, would you like to give us a few more insights into this rather ambitious vision that has been set out for us?
Thank you very much, Shada. My name is Nick Westcott. I'm the Managing Director for the Middle East and North Africa. You have just heard from Federica Mogherini, and you have heard yesterday from Elizabeth Guigou as President, and from our host, Foreign Minister George Vella. So I don't want to add much. My main function here today is as Mrs. Mogherini's ears. As she could not be here, and she very much wanted to be here, I will do the listening, and I will report back to her on our conclusions. And as she said herself, she's looking forward to receiving some of those who are speaking here today in Brussels to continue the conversation. There are just 3 points I wanted to underline about what we are doing. I myself, it's inspiring to be in a room full of young people. I myself in no way can pretend to be young anymore. I was born in 1956, the year of the Suez Crisis, at a time when European empires were unraveling. And this was a process of transition, a transition from colonialism to nationalism. There's a feeling at the moment that there is a similar transition, in some ways an unraveling, not just in the Middle East, but also in Europe. Old certainties are being questioned, old elites are being challenged, new ideologies are being tested. And in this process, many are beginning to resort to violence. It matters how this is going to evolve. It matters for all of us how the current conjuncture is going to evolve. There are clearly many unhappy people who are not satisfied with the prospects for themselves, for their lives, for their families, and they are seeking to do something about it. Our challenge is to channel that energy and that questioning into positive channels, not negative channels. And that is what our conversation needs to be about. In Europe, I can feel it, there is an uncertainty and a fear, and sometimes this fear is directed against outsiders. People close down on their own communities. They want the challenges from the rest of the world to go away. In the Middle East, I feel, as I travel around the region, there is a fear of Islamic jihadism, or revolutionaries who wish to overturn the order. And they are willing to do so no matter what the cost and the suffering to people. If these people succeed, if they are allowed to succeed, then we are looking at decades of conflict. Conflict breeds conflict, as was said earlier on, and it becomes perpetuating, becomes more and more difficult to solve. And when we say we are here to listen, we have to be clear that there are often discordant voices. There are people saying, I want my job, I want my family to be safe, I want my ideology to rule, I want a hard version of Sharia law to apply because it's right. There are words that we don't particularly want to hear in that, but we must listen to them and to what underpins them if we are to give a constructive answer. We are in practice in an ideological crisis, as well as an economic, social, and a security crisis. And unless we face up to that ideological crisis, we are not going to solve the problem. It's very easy in that sense of crisis to peddle simple answers, which will appeal to everybody. A pure form of Islam is the answer. Excluding everybody else, closing the immigration borders is the answer. People like simple answers. They're appealing, but they are based on fantasy in most cases. We know that from our experience over many years, and we have to bring that experience to bear, and we have to translate it into convincing arguments that will persuade people hope lies not in this closing down, but hope lies in keeping open societies and a willingness to exchange with other people. Therefore, I want to mention just two things. Firstly, in responding to this, we have a strategy in the European Union. As Federica Mogherini mentioned, there is a global strategy which was adopted last June and published, and in that, both preserving the values that have made the European Union what it is, and promoting stability internally and in the neighboring region is at the heart of that strategy. And we need to find ways to translate that into action, as Elizabeth Guigou was saying yesterday. The Anna Lindh Foundation is at the center of this challenge. It is mentioned in the strategy as a core body that enables us to bring together ideas from North and South, people, and above all young people from North and South from all the different countries in order to exchange on that. So it is a central pillar of what we're trying to achieve in that strategy. Secondly, we have a European neighbourhood programme, and it is in this that we have the resources to deploy. And the question is, how do we use that? That's the significant sums of money. And under the revised ENP, as we call it, we have a much more responsive policy. It's not, here's a European prescription, this will bring success for you. It's based on a dialogue, on differentiation. Different countries need different forms of partnership. They need different kinds of support. But what should we be spending the money on? As was highlighted in one of the questions earlier today, some of the parts of countries. If you come from Tunis, you are doing fine. If you live in the backwoods, in the deep south in Tunisia, what is there for you? We need to make sure these resources are deployed in a way that will bridge these inequalities, develop these economies, and develop these societies in ways that will give hope, particularly to those disadvantaged communities where the lure of the siren song of the fundamentalists is most strong. Thirdly, migration, which, as Foreign Minister Vella said yesterday, is a core issue that we cannot ignore. We have a strategy for that. Here in Valletta last November, we held a summit with all the countries of Africa, all the countries of Europe, across North Africa, to draw up a 5-point plan which would tackle not only the symptoms of migration, but the root causes. And it's very important we implement that, and we recognize this is a two-way aspect. It's not just stopping people traveling from south to north, but ensuring there are legal channels that work, ensuring that there are opportunities in the countries of origin, that there is assistance with cracking down on traffickers in the countries of transit. So we have a strategy. Putting it into action requires three things. Firstly, the Anna Lindh Foundation is invaluable not only as a body, but as a network. With the number of organizations represented here, the links that you have throughout the region, we can mobilize and act as a multiplier to spread messages, build contacts, and have this conversation and interact with the public as widely as possible. Secondly, the European Union has its relations with the governments of the region, and we need to use those to pick up some of the themes we've been hearing today, make sure in the policies that these countries adopt, the projects and programs the European Union supports, that we are targeting our help most effectively. Where can we have influence? Where can we generate growth? How can we develop entrepreneurship, as you saw from the opinion trend survey? Encouraging entrepreneurship was one of the most popular features on the southern Mediterranean countries. And that's right. And many of the governments are not pursuing policies that enable that unleash that entrepreneurial potential that young people can use to create livelihoods, generate jobs. We can help with that. We need to look at where are the levers. In Lebanon and Jordan, the European Union has put together compacts which are two ways. They provide additional resources, particularly to the host communities and to the refugee communities there, to ensure all children are getting education. But in return, there are commitments by the Jordanian government to allow refugees to be employed in the country so they can gain a real livelihood and maintain a sense of dignity and worth. And secondly, in a country like Tunisia, we are having a very intense dialogue. Tunisia is the great success story of the Arab Spring, but it remains fragile. How can we help develop the economy there so that it can deliver on the hopes that the people have pinned on the new democratic government? And in many of the other countries in the region, we are quite concerned about the closing of the political space available for civil society. And this is an issue that we do raise, we must continue to raise, because our firm belief from our own experience is only by allowing people to speak that you can create strong public support for the action against those who peddle a destructive ideology. Last point, we have in the Maltese presidency, coming for the first 6 months of next year, a tremendous friend, ally, motivator, and mediator. It's a country that sits right at the crossroads, and we, on the European side, intend to use, along with our Maltese colleagues, to use that opportunity of those 6 months to generate as much energy in this dialogue, as much opportunity from these meetings, as we possibly can. So I've said enough. My job now is to listen. I will do that, and I look forward to hearing all your views. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Nick, you're behind me now. So, young Mediterranean voices, let's hear from a young Mediterranean voice. Rihab, let's have your views on the ambitions you hold for this initiative.
I'd like to say good morning to all of you all first. I'd like to introduce myself. I am Rihab Mejri. I am part of the Young Arab Voices, soon to be Young Mediterranean Voices program. I am an English teacher. I personally have had a first-hand experience with the Young Arab Voices program, and it had changed my life, and I dare to say all those who have been members of it. It has taught us many principles. It has made us believe in respect, in tolerance, and patience, but most importantly, it helped us grow as people, not only through the experiences and the shared intercultural dialogue we had within our country, but also within the whole Arab region. And I believe that Young Arab Voices has reached a point in its evolution that demands such a scale-up into a Mediterranean outlook, since we all know that Mediterranean areas share the same struggles, the same challenges, but also the same aspirations. I believe it will be very beneficial for all of us. And before getting too emotional, I just want to say that I am very humbled, and we are all very humbled to be here and to attend such a growth that we all think is natural. Thank you.
Thank you. Vasily, your comments?
Okay, my comment. I'm really happy that the Young Arab Voice is going to the north, especially we will arrive to each corner of the European Union, to the north in Estonia, Finland, United Kingdom. Basically, I know the Young Arab Voices since the last forum in Marseille, which was brilliantly organized. And we will be really happy to participate in this agenda, debate, discuss all the main important issues for all the shores of Mediterranean. So good luck to everyone and take part. Thank you.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this very stimulating first plenary session. We've had a discussion with our panelists, and now we have the launch of the Young Mediterranean Voices. Thank you very much for your participation. Please join me in thanking everyone. Well done, Anna Lindh Foundation. Coffee and tea awaits us. And if I could just say to journalists in the room, if you could please come into a huddle here, I think you will be able to access some of our panelists and talk to some of the key people here in this room. Thank you again very much. Thank you.